growing up, and I ended up going to school in New York City, and I ended up studying business because I ended up getting a scholarship in college. And while I was in college, I dabbled with journalism a little bit. I worked for Nielsen Media while I was in school and did a number of different odd jobs to pay the rent in New York City. And then I started interning for a production company in New York. And that's when I started reading screenplays. And I was about 18 or 19 years old. And the minute I loved reading poetry as a kid, and I still love reading poetry now, but reading a screenplay for the first time, it was just that moment where you connect with something and you know that's exactly what I want to do with my life. And so I started writing my own, and I didn't know at the time at that age that I also wanted to direct, but I loved a screenplay is like poetry. You have such a limited space to write something very emotive and very beautiful, lyrical, visual, powerful. And so I saved up some money at 22 and I moved to Los Angeles. And I ended up writing a spec pilot, and a spec TV pilot about my roommates and my foray into Los Angeles, and it got seen by a wonderful person who ended up giving me an opportunity to make that pilot properly. And so it was in directing that project made me realize that I loved working with actors, and I love rewriting along the way, and especially once an actor. And then our industry is such a trust-based one because it takes so many people to create something beautiful. It's not just one person. It's it's the team. It's almost, I describe film, the movie is like a watch. So many different things have to be working in tandem together for it to tick. And so from that point, I realized that I did want to direct, and I started I've always run little businesses and stuff when I was a kid, and I treated the industry kind of like a business, and just made a lot of mistakes as I went along, and just kind of learned along the way because I didn't go to film school. And so I just kept writing screenplays and writing and trying to make contacts and networking. And eventually the jobs got bigger. I started building a production company after that first spec pilot with just making lists and going out to small brands and jewelry brands. And I liked fashion films because there was a narrative quality to that. And I offered to work for free for people. And eventually, you build a portfolio, and you also develop your own visual style. You have to work and you have to do it to understand what you're capable of and what your style is, and learning the language and learning what all of the other department heads do. And eventually, like I said, those jobs got bigger and the budgets got bigger. And eventually I started working, for agency clients on the commercial side. And then on the film side, it was when I met my now husband and producing partner, Ed. We started dating. We met on a commercial shoot, and he started helping me produce. And we finally were able to get our first independent film off the ground. We found a tiny bit of money and then, funding begets funding. And once you've got something going and there's energy, that energy is helpful. And so we got our first indie movie, Deserted, off the ground, and then a second indie movie off the ground. And it was really those two films where it's so hard. You have to find your champions in our industry, and somebody who's willing to give you a shot, whether that is a financier for your first movie or your second or your third, or it's a studio that believes in you enough to say, I'm going to let you steer the ship. And eventually, because of the indie films where we wore a lot of hats and, did a number of different things on those films, I had a very serendipitous meeting with a wonderful producer named Jeremy Bolt. And during that meeting, we talked about Black Beauty. And then Beauty happened for Hollywood timetables. Beauty happened very quickly. It's about 3 years from the first meeting to the release on Disney Plus.
Okay, so what actually inspired you to do to make movies?
Well, I think I really love what you're attracted to, or why you want to tell stories. I think evolves over the course of you doing them. And with Black Beauty especially, the outreach from children and families from around the world who were impacted by that film. And then, of course, Beauty is based on the classic novel by Anna Sewell, which is all about empathy toward each other and compassion toward each other, and both toward the human world as well as the animal world and our natural wild world. And the publication of that novel in the late 1800s really changed and helped revolutionize our understanding of animal empathy, for example, or animal intelligence. And so the impact that that film had, and just the personal messages that I've gotten on social media, or people find my email from kids, especially, that
Yeah.
have found healing, or they've been impacted by the movie. I think that storytelling is a responsibility, and if you have a platform where people are seeing your work, especially on a large scale, really thinking about the messages that you want to put forth into the world, because perhaps if you're
Yeah.
lucky, they could live forever. So that's aligned with my vision and outlook for filmmaking and what I want to do. I want to tell stories that are impactful and
Yeah.
beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you write it as well. You write your own films as well. So actually, I write too. So that's the thing. I mean, how do you cope up with the writer's block? Do you face
What was the last question?
do you face it very often, the writer's block?
It comes and goes. I think when you put a lot of pressure on yourself, that's when it descends on you.
Yeah.
Got a big pitch, or I put a lot of pressure on myself always, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's not the best thing. But
Yeah.
but yes, of course, I think every writer experiences writer's block at some point. I'm fortunate to not experience it a lot. Yeah, like I said, it's really when I put too much pressure on, needing to come up with something to spec, for example, that fits in a box, where
Yeah.
trying to come up with something that's marketable and it's commercial and it's timely and it's versus something that occurs organically. These it's just stories, for me anyway. Stories usually occur very organically, the ones that I want to tell, or you happen upon a great book in a little
Yeah.
bookshop, and you just happen to read this particular thing that inspires you to go down a path, or yeah. But yeah, short answer, yeah, I think everybody does.
So what is actually your process? I mean, do you write every day? Is it, do you follow any routine?
I Everybody's different. I don't really follow. I do a lot of different things. So I have if I think I would benefit from a little bit more routine, to be honest. But in between, I write. Obviously I direct and I edit as well. I started editing about 15 years
Yeah.
ago, and I really, especially, I ended up editing Black Beauty. That was my first big project. Lots of pressure on that one, and a lot of wonderful trust from the studio to give me an opportunity to do that. But but in addition to those things, I also run a small nonprofit called the Wild Beauty Foundation. So I do a lot of animal advocacy, especially with horses, and coming up with programs for children. So
Yeah.
trying to find, I think the trickiest thing is finding a balance when there's a lot you want to accomplish. When I'm
Yeah.
writing something, though, if I begin a screenplay, I'm zoned in on usually just that thing, and I really try to block out when. Maybe that's a better answer to your question. If
Yeah.
and this would be my advice, if you are in the middle of writing a screenplay, or you embark on that and you write fade in and you're in it, try to stay in it, because it's like, to me, I have to live the movie and see the movie and be within the film and hear the characters talking. And sometimes they do surprising things when you're really that immersed in your story. I think
Yeah.
that immersion and focus is really important.
Okay. So, how was your experience of working with the amazing cast and crew, like Kate Winslet and Mackenzie Foy? How was your experience?
It was incredible. We were very, very fortunate with our casting. Mackenzie was just, we met over coffee. I write actors' personal letters when we approach
Okay.
people to be part of our films. And so I, of course, wrote a letter to Mackenzie. I wrote one for Kate and Ian Glenn. And the minute that I knew Mackenzie was perfect from the role from watching Interstellar. And I remember rewatching that movie as we were starting to think of who is Joe Green. And
Yeah.
I saw her performance again, and I jumped off the couch and I said, she's Joe. She's Joe. Nobody else
Yeah.
is Joe. I emailed the producer, Jeremy, that night, and I said, this is Joe. And thankfully she loved the novel growing up. And we just had a wonderful conversation over coffee with her mom in Los Angeles, after she read the screenplay. And she said yes. And then when Kate Winslet said yes as well, I mean, it was just surreal because that doesn't, you're not always as fortunate to get exactly who you want in a cast for maybe they don't respond to the material or maybe it's, there's a scheduling conflict or there's so many reasons why it might not work. But for this one, it really did work. And there was that serendipity was just really profound. And Kate Winslet is just, she's an icon for so many reasons. And of course, she's so talented, but she brought such a, both she and Mackenzie, and really the whole cast, everyone brought this elegance to that project, which
Yeah,
really connects to the original material and was so important.
actually. And on set you have directed the amazing cast, but as well as you have directed a Wild Beauty. So how was it? How do you handle these kind of things?
Well, the documentary was definitely a passion project, and we cobbled together the financing as we went along for from conception to completion. It was about 4 years, and we went
Yeah,
out to the wild American West, which is the landscapes are so diverse, and it was an amazing opportunity to get to see so much country and so many different places and different types of horses. And we had to, by contrast, Black Beauty had a crew of several hundred people, and Wild Beauty
yeah,
had a crew of five. Our credits, our post title credits are really funny because we had such a small crew. But we went out there with, we shot the doc on an Alexa, which is a very heavy camera, and on our main lens really was often this massive Canon wildlife lens, 1,000 millimeter lens. We had a doubler on it a lot of times to really get up close and personal with the horses, because it was really important to me with the doc to be all animals are individuals, and horses are so intelligent, and they have family. They're called bands. And it's a family of horses. It's called a band, and
yeah,
several bands can make up a herd. And it was really important to me to make sure people felt connected with the individual horses, because just like with a narrative story, if you care about your lead character or his or her best friend, or you usually identify with a character in a movie, and I really wanted people to identify with with several individual horses to care about
yeah,
the larger issue that we're trying to raise awareness for. So it was an adventure. We had a lot of moments of extreme beauty where we hiked out for hours carrying these heavy, cameras and lenses, and then we would sit down in the grass and wait for the horses. And sometimes at sunset, they would surround us by the hundreds, and it was like gold was on the air. It was just beautiful. And then we also experienced the horror of the roundups and going to actual roundups where they're using helicopters to chase these horses. I mean, they buzz them at eye level, and it's just, and the babies, these little tiny foals that are only a few days old are getting stampeded. And it is astounding to me that in this day and age, in our modern world, we are doing
yeah,
that to wild horses that are supposed to be federally protected. And it's just bonkers to me. But I think the biggest problem is people just don't know. So that's why we did the documentary, and we poured our lives, and we made a
yeah.
lot of personal sacrifices to get that film done. And hopefully it'll debut later this year. We've submitted to a couple of major festivals, and the world needs to know. The world needs to know what's going on, and then we can make change.
Yes. I mean, whatever you were doing, and I mean, the Wild Beauty Foundation, I've read some articles about it, and it's incredible. So I would like to say my friends and as well as some film students will be joining here to ask you something. Okay, so here we go. Hello, Kavita. Hi.
Yeah, hi Jeanette. Hi Ashley.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Kavita, would you like to ask something?
No, not now. I was listening to
Okay.
your conversation and it was really nice.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you please share
Okay.
your more experience regarding the things where your involvement was there?
I couldn't quite hear the question. Can you repeat that?
Sorry, could you please repeat your question, please, Kavita?
Can you please explain in more details, like what was your basic role over there, and what was you doing over there, and what was the experience about it?
For Black Beauty or for Wild Beauty?
Yes.
So for Black Beauty, I was the writer of the screenplay. I directed the film, and then I ended up editing the film as well. And then with Black Beauty, actually, the documentary was born out of Black Beauty because it was really important to us in modernizing that story and to honor Anna Sewell's original intentions in writing that story. A lot of people don't know that Black Beauty, the novel, was not necessarily written as a children's book. It was an animal welfare plea to protect the horses of her time. And Anna Sewell, as a child, was crippled at 4 years old. And she was carried by horses her entire life, which inspired her great love of them and also her deeper understanding of how intelligent and compassionate and empathetic and family oriented horses are. And so the publication of Black Beauty was really revolutionizing for that time when, not everybody thought horses were intelligent and they were used as cab horses and, not always treated the right way. And so in modernizing Black Beauty, because we wanted to reach children now, audiences now, I was tasked with figuring out what is the modern day version of Black Beauty. And producers wanted to film in the United States. And so I started researching all of the, different issues horses are facing today in the world. And I grew up with horses when I was a kid, and not in a fancy way. I didn't, horseback riding can get very expensive, but I was around horses most of my childhood. And so I was very passionate about telling this story. And it was a shock to me that I didn't know what was going on with wild horses as an equestrian in my youth. And then I thought, how many people don't know what's going on with this larger problem? And so I incorporated that into the storyline of Black Beauty, and the producers were so supportive, and the process was very collaborative to include, like, that's our way into Black Beauty, and we're gonna do what Anna Sewell set out to do and tell this story and try to make a difference for the horses of our time. And so then, because we actually shot the movie in South Africa. I don't know if you guys, you probably know that. We shot it in South Africa for tax purposes and tax credits and budget and all of those things. But I really wanted to include real wild horses in the film for authenticity, because wild horses look a lot different and are a lot different behaviorally than domestic horses. And so it was a few months before we left for South Africa, my husband and we reached out to a couple of people that love animals and liked the messaging of this, who gave us a little bit of money to go out with that small crew. And we went to Utah, Nevada, and Wyoming. And this was in 2019. We went out to those 3 states, and we filmed wild horses in the wild, and we got to start understanding their behaviors. Because also, if you're telling a story about something, of course you want to do as much research as you can to become familiar and deeply, intimately familiar. So it was really important to see the behaviors of wild horses out in the wild, and the family bonds and all of those beautiful themes to better inform the approach for Black Beauty as a narrative film. But then, given we were filming all of this beautiful content, which, if you watch Black Beauty, when little baby Beauty is wandering through the wild and she turns her head and she sees her family, a lot of that footage is from Utah, and it's a herd called the Anaki. And it's this amazing place, which is so accessible, and you can, if you want to see wild horses in the wild in the United States, that's often where I would suggest to go, because they're right off the road and they're right there, and you can see them and study them. And so in filming those horses, and then also our first roundup was in 2019 in Nevada. And that also very much informed how I approached the staged roundup in Black Beauty, which of course was rehearsed for days, and like horse safe paths were created for the horses to run. And it was a very short period of running, a lot of editing involved in that scene. And it was done very safely with our horse team, but it was having witnessed a real roundup and then staging one was it was a very emotional experience, because the real ones are so terrible. And I was so grateful to our producers and to Disney as a studio that we really, that we had, that those scenes stayed in the film, and they are very lyrically done. Despite the horror and the sadness, because we want, of course, it's a balance where if you're doing a movie for families and thinking about your demographic, it's so important to to emotionally balance a scene like that, which is kind of, I've always described it as kind of like the stampede scene in The Lion King, where Simba loses his father, and
Yeah.
that's a kids movie, and children can handle more than you think, but it's all about how you approach it. So in seeing the real roundup in Nevada, that that really informed how we broke that scene down and how we covered it and which angles and how the horses ran, and even just as what are they run into, what does that look like? It's like a jute, it's called a trap site, and there's the jute, and then there are the corrals, and we modeled everything just like it's done in real life. And so that trip into the wild was really, really instrumental in bringing authenticity to Black Beauty. And then because we had raised a little bit of financing to do that first trip, we ended up saying, we've got to keep going. We need to tell people
Yeah.
about this issue. And that turned into embarking on this feature-length documentary project, which we've just completed.
So how much, pressure did you have on your head? Because, it's Disney. So how much pressure did you have?
There was a lot. It was the most pressure I've ever felt in my life. And I like to think that I can handle pressure pretty well, but it was especially it's a number of things. Not Black Beauty is an iconic title, so you don't want to mess something up. And
Exactly.
it's beloved. So there was a lot of pressure from really wanting to tell a beautiful story, wanting to honor Anna Sewell, wanting to honor the messages. And Constantine Film was the production company who financed the movie and supported the movie and the vision and all of that. And I'm so grateful to them. And so Disney Plus acquired the film. And so when I was editing, which was a huge opportunity that Constantine approved and said, and that was Jeremy Bolt was the main producer and really the champion of a lot of those. When something was really important creatively, we always, and I would say, if you're doing a movie, especially, and television too, but especially a film, and you have a lot of people involved with a lot of different opinions, which is great, but you also need to find your champion, the person that you
Yeah.
really align with creatively, and you're not always going to agree. And that's a good thing, because better ideas come from, sometimes, our perspective is best idea wins. It doesn't matter if it comes from a production assistant or just ego out the door, because there's too much ego in our industry sometimes. And I think people work more effectively and better if you're collaborative and if you're open and people aren't afraid to, give you an opinion. But the pressure of editing the movie, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm 35. I started immediately. I've got it. My hair is dyed now, but I've got a gray streak down here from just I think it sheerly was the pressure of editing a feature-length film especially when Disney expressed their interest. And then an executive I was editing the movie in Munich, in Germany, because Constantine is based there. And so I had my little editing room, and an executive from Disney flew over, and he sat behind me, and I showed 32 minutes of the movie. And you're in a dark room, and I'm at my editing station, and
Yeah.
he and two other producers are sitting behind me silent for about 32 minutes. And, when you're showing something, you're always thinking, or you're trying to hear people and how they might react. And just is the executive going to giggle in the right place, or is he going to be emotional in the right place? And thankfully Disney came aboard, and they had a lot of notes as we were going through the editing phase, and which were great. And we made the movie the best version, I think, of what it was meant to be. So, yeah. But I think it's, balancing, trying to balance the pressure that you inevitably will feel at a certain point, and just trying to stay true to your vision while being open and collaborative at the same time.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, Kavita, for asking the question. So we will give. Okay. So we will go to our another guest, another student, another film enthusiastic. I would like to. He's my friend. He's my
Yeah,
childhood
Ashley,
friend.
thank you for
So
sharing your view. And it was really
yeah,
great to hear it from you because, like, even after seeing the movie and like knowing about the movie, and we get to know much more about the background and how it was made and everything. With like, like you're the director of the movie, and like you are explaining to us that it really means a very big thing to us, and like it's really very nice to hear about everything and just to listen and know all the things in details from you. It's a very big thing.
Thank you so much. I'm
thank you so much.
very
Thank you so
touched.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for the great
All
work.
right. We'll be going to another guy who's my friend, my childhood friend. He's Kostov. Kostov, please, if you have any question, you can ask here.
Hey Ashley, good morning.
Morning, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. How are you?
Doing great.
Okay. Thank you for coming. Thank you. First of all, congratulations for your success in Black Beauty. It's a really, really beautiful film. I have to appreciate it. Okay, so the thing I want to ask is like more like a personal question, not on Black Beauty stuff. So I was asking like, when was the first time you got to know that you realized that filmmaking is going to be your way to tell a story, or you wanted to be a filmmaker? When was the first time you got that, you understood that?
I think it was because screenwriting is to me is such a big part, of course, of filmmaking. I knew from the first time that I read a screenplay that this was the industry I wanted to be in. It was just that moment of I remember thinking this is like poetry. This reads like poetry, but but there's such a complexity to film, of course. And so it was I was I think I was 18 at the time, 18 or 19 years old, and then I realized I wanted to be a director the first time I directed that spec pilot, and I put that first version of that together with I've always had a number of different little odd jobs as I was getting my career off the ground, and everything from I did real estate, I did web design, I taught ballroom dancing lessons to wedding couples in New York City, like anything to basically support the larger goal, which was to become a writer, and then later realizing that I wanted to direct. And wanting to direct really came from two things, which was um, like I said earlier, I love working with actors, and it's just so beautiful when a story comes to life through the beauty of performance. And then really being able to execute what is to be able to execute yourself what's on the page. And I've always had both a creative side as well as a technical side, and I think it's really been helpful in my journey as a filmmaker. So, and I think this industry grabs you when you're meant to if you're meant to become a filmmaker. I think most of us have that moment of, oh my gosh, this
Yeah,
is what could be more extraordinary than being able to become a storyteller and hopefully getting
Yeah,
your words out into the world, or being able to impact people or inspire people or
yeah,
impact their lives. I mean, we've had through our nonprofit, it all started with beauty, but with beauty, I've gotten connected to so many kids around the world that in different ways the film has brought them to the world of horses, or it's impacted their lives in these really magnificent ways. It's pretty amazing. So when you think about stories, I think it's really important to think, what if I get my wish with this and it's seen by millions of people? What's the message I want to put into the world?
yeah. Okay, so
right.
I would like to do a rapid fire session. Okay, so it would be fun. So
Sure.
let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So describe these people in one word. Okay. So first one is Mackenzie Foy.
Lyrical.
Okay. Kate Winslet.
Elegant.
Okay. Callum Lynch.
Kind.
Okay. Uh, Clint Eastwood.
Who?
Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood?
Yeah.
Oh, iconic.
Okay. Steven Spielberg.
Visionary.
Visionary. Actually, I would like to ask, who is your favorite director?
Oh goodness, I mean, I think if I were to distill my, it's between Terrence Malick and Spielberg for sure. I've always loved the visuals of both directors and the emotions of both directors. But yeah,
I love Spielberg too. I'm a huge admirer of Spielberg. So I think each and every filmmaker, I think whoever is making films or whoever is making films independently or whoever is studying movies, I think he has that kind of impact in everyone's life.
yes,
That's his persona. So I mean, like growing up watching movies like Jurassic Park, and other movies like E.T. and so but I think War Horse is there. I think did you go through War Horse? Because I find some similarities, because I mean both of the film has the same wild beauty.
that,
uh, you know
that's a high compliment.
yeah.
Thank you. That's a
So did you? I mean, yeah, before making the film Black Beauty, what are the movies did you go through? Did you go through any movie?
With beauty, it really wasn't. I mean, I've seen, just as a horse lover, I've seen pretty much not everyone, but I've seen a lot of horse movies, and I love a lot of them. But I really, in terms of studying, of course, you want to study what works or why a film might have been impactful. But for me, I've never really studied other work in that way, like to inform my
Yeah,
style, if that makes sense. So in terms of, yeah, I would say I've seen plenty of horse movies, but in terms of the construction of beauty, it was actually more image driven when I worked with our cinematographer David Proctor.
yeah,
When I'm putting together a pitch deck, for example, of a film, and I put together a deck for Black Beauty originally with my vision
yeah,
and the story, and I go through thousands of images, and everybody's different. This is just my process, but
yeah,
I go through thousands of images, and I find a lot of inspiration especially through nature photography, but with shapes, and I like abstract forms, but I find a lot of inspiration I use Pinterest, and I will create boards of thousands of photos. And then sometimes you don't even know where to start, and again, talking about pressure, just sometimes the story finds you. And so when I'm embarking on a pitch, or when David Proctor, our DP, and I were going through tone and color language and symbolism and just all of those different conversations you have with your partners, we had a massive file of photographs that we
yeah,
were inspired by. Horse photography obviously was a big one, because with Black Beauty, one of the things I really wanted to do, often with horse movies, you don't always have the most beautiful shots of horses. Of course, a horse in motion is just spectacular.
yeah,
But beauty being a character in the film, we really wanted to approach our camera language in a way that made her, we covered her like a human. We had close-ups of beauty. It was so important to me to make sure it wasn't just a medium shot of a horse where you're not paying attention to their body language, for example, or the turn of an ear means a certain thing. So that was actually part of the reason I wanted to cut the film myself, because I know horses, and I wanted to preserve the integrity of Beauty's language in the film, her
yeah.
unspoken language in the film. So that was very important. But
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you so much for joining this session, and it was lovely talking to you. And I hope if you visit India ever, just I will receive you whenever you come to India. Just let me know. Okay.
good. I would love to visit,
Yeah, yeah.
do a film there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so okay. So I have one question. I will ask it on backstage. Obviously, one other question. So I will ask it on backstage. Let's end the session. Okay. Thank you, everyone, whoever joined the session and watched it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. So let's end the session. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.